All right. Welcome to another episode of the Cassels Cast. My name's Eamon Cassels. Joining me today is going to be Andrew Dukowitz to discuss all things Timberwolves offseason. Without any further ado, let's just get into the episode. All right, joining the show now for Timberwolves offseason preview is Andrew Dukowitz. But first things first, how are you doing today?
Good, man. Not as busy. We were talking about that before we hopped on here, and it's been nice to not have to be at Mayo Clinic Square or Target Center every day. I'll never take for granted what I get, to do for a side gig, or I guess now reporting's probably my main job and nursing's a side gig. But yeah, it's nice to not have to be there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A little bit more free time in the offseason so far. And the Wolves obviously have a super busy offseason ahead of them. So we're going to really talk about it from all angles. I think where I first want to start off is Tim Connelly's press conference, which happened earlier this week. And as someone who was there, I just want to get your perspective, some major takeaways that you had from Connelly's press conference and just the Timberwolves' overall vision for the offseason.
Yeah, there's a couple things with Conley that really stuck out to me. One of them being his focus on emotional maturity. He brought it up. I went back and looked at it today. He brought it up in three different answers of like their need to target emotional maturity. And that was just kind of rang home to me of just like, one, what does that mean? Like, I think with the exit interviews process overall, the whole moodiness and guys talking about certain, players at times playing for stats instead of the team, or different type of like frictions in the locker room. It does seem kind of clear in hindsight that like this team's leaders, Mike Conley, Rudy Gobert, Kyle Anderson, like the actual like leader, veteran, emotional, intelligent guys just don't have the same juice that they did 2 years ago. And I think when you're making that pivot to the more Ant, Jaden, Naz, Io section of this roster, it became pretty apparent that they just need more adults, which I know that's a cliche in football and basketball and every sport of getting like an adult in the room. But for this Wolves team, it just seemed like that was something that jumped out, that Conley seems to be hinting that he is going to focus on just getting adults on the team, whether that's to help Ant with some of the leadership roles, because Ant is still a young man figuring out like how to be a mid 20-year-old superstar in this world, or whether it means that they just need different personalities that are going to gel better together. Um, whether that's moving out Julius, moving out Rudy, moving out a bench piece. I took that away. Um, Secondary to that, the other thing I took away is just he mentioned some names of players and was very positive on them. I asked him about Jaden McDaniels. He all but confirmed that Jaden's going to be on this team. They have hope that he can take more of a playmaking role, that he has a lot more left to kind of show on the offensive side. Ayo Dosunmu was brought up, that they really want him back. And then TJ Shannon and Johan Berenger were kind of the two other players that just organically kind of came up in answers. And he mentioned about how eye-opening it was seeing TJ in the playoffs and how they want to get him more opportunities with the ball to kind of drive from the top. And then the excitement around Johan, it sounds like, is shared by Tim Connelly as it is with like Finch and everybody on the team. Those were kind of my takeaways, though. Just like it sounds like they need to get some more mature fellas in the locker room that still can play at a high level. Because I'm not saying Mike, Kyle, Rudy, those guys weren't like emotionally mature. It's just when it's coming from Mike on the bench versus it's coming from Mike on the court, it's just different. And then the other thing was like I think they tipped their hat that like Ant, Jaden, Johan, and TJ have futures with this team, whether that's expanded roles or what that might be. But it sounds like they're happy to keep them at least.
Yeah, most definitely. I think the emotional maturity piece is massive, especially like you talked about, not just with Conley's press conference, but going back to Finch's, and then Naz Reid obviously had that viral quote about just moodiness in general. And watching it on TV or for you in person, yeah, it's very evident that was a key problem for this
I
team throughout the season.
I
And
dug
I thought you
this
made
up
such a
for
good
you.
point there about just the leaders of this team being.
Oh, I was just gonna say I dug this up for you, by the way. I was going through the Twitter archives looking at different clips and stuff. And this is a comment from Finch in March of 2025. Are you ready for this one? So 15 months ago, Finch was talking to us in the media and he said, "We do have a moody group in that regard. We got to get better to survive our own mistakes a little better. I think guys have a propensity to kind of worry a little bit too much about themselves. Right now it doesn't matter. If you wanted to change your scoring average, you'd have to average 80 points down the stretch. What matters most is the win." That was just exactly what everybody said after this season. So like the emotional maturity part, and I apologize for interrupting you, but like it's been such an ongoing problem the last 2 years that I think I think everybody at least is on the same page now of like this is an issue, we got to figure it out fast.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's such a great point when you just think about how long this has been a problem. And then even going back to last year, you said that was in March. So then they end the season going like 16-4 or whatever.
Hmm.
They have that great playoff run, fall short to OKC, whatever. But then they decide to really run it back and they don't make any major roster changes at all during that offseason. And to me, that seemed fairly logical when you look at Brennan and Julius and Donte right before the season. And then you have this successful playoff run. It takes a while for these guys to gel. But to me, it made sense and you go with the continuity. But I feel like from a very early standpoint in the season, you could see that the continuity didn't totally translate over, and just something was wrong. And then they had their moments and flashes of brilliance, but throughout the season, it just wasn't a consistent enough championship level team that they want to be at. And I do think just the personalities, for whatever reason, played a big role in that. I think a lot of people are going to just immediately point to Julius, and watching the games, his body language is pretty noticeable at times, but I feel like it goes beyond Julius. I feel like it's a whole team effort when you have like you said, Conley mentioned in this 3 or 4 times in his press conference, and then you have really everyone else. They can't just be talking about one player, to be honest with you. I feel like maybe he's the biggest culprit, but it's a collective team effort. And then the leadership piece, like you were talking about earlier, I think is big because when your three biggest leaders, I personally view Mike as probably like the biggest like vocal leader, emotionally mature guy. When him especially is taking a backseat, and then Kyle's coming back mid-season, and then you have Rudy, who is the closest thing to a star, but he's still probably like the third best player on the team or whatever. It's just different than when it's coming from Ant and then the co-star, whoever that might be. So yeah, I definitely think that's a big thing to work on, and I do think they still have great guys. I feel like that's one thing they always talked about. It's not that anybody's necessarily a bad guy by any means. It's just they don't have that leadership skill quite as developed. And then, like you said, I think the other thing that stood out would be the sub 26 core
Yeah.
that Conley mentioned with Ant, Jaden, Io. I don't think he said Io actually, but like TJ, Yohan, all those guys, and then Nas, who John K reported. I can't remember if Conley said that, but that's I feel like their core going forward, and getting on that Ant timeline is something we can talk about a little bit more later. But I think that's going to be a huge priority. And then the other thing is like 4 words that will stick with me from this press conference, and like the first thing that jumped out was everything's on the table.
Hmm.
And then he also sort of said that in like 3 or 4 different ways, where it's just like, we're going to be super aggressive. We know we have to get better. We know there's a big gap between us, OKC, and San Antonio. And I feel like that's the biggest thing that I'm looking at heading into the offseason. It's just how are they going to be aggressive with the lack of draft capital? What exactly does that look like? And I feel like that was my other big takeaway.
Yeah, I do want to just touch on your point of like it's not just Julius because obviously all those quotes come out after the game, whether it's Ant saying, it's not my job to figure out how to get us better, or Mike, Dante, Jaden, Nas, and Finch alluding to like needing more selflessness in the locker room and guys kind of getting down on themselves, the moodiness. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, Julius decided not to do an exit interview, which, when that's the case, I think a fan base and a lot of people all of a sudden look and go, well, everyone else said this, XYZ, and one guy isn't there. So it must have meant that they're talking about that one guy. I don't think it's just Julius. I mean, I look at Ant in some regards, like the amount of playmaking and ball handling that was put on his shoulders and the kind of lack of development of that at sometimes. Like sometimes he's really good at it. Other times it's like if you were playing with him at the Y, you'd be ticked off immediately because you're never getting the ball. And then just the not having the like again the point guard thing, like Mike Conley talks about it all the time, of like he just has like a running counter in his head of like, how long has it been since this guy's touched the ball, how long has it been since this guy's shot. Jaden hasn't seen a possession in 3 minutes, let's get him something easy. And they just didn't have anyone that was monitoring that this year. And I think when you don't have someone that's at least setting the table for guys, you know, you miss out on shots. Everybody's trying to get the next paycheck. Everybody does care about their statistics at some points in the season, and it's just hard. So I took it more of like, sure, Julius might have been one of the culprits of that, but I think everybody suffered from kind of that moodiness that they talked about. And also, like, I do think it was a lot of not like Ant slander, but a lot of like, hey, Ant can't do this. Like we gotta get somebody in here that can distribute and let Ant just be Ant. Which, again, going to your point of this offseason being a big one and that a trade or movement is likely to come, like I again, we asked Mike Conley in the exit interviews, like, does this team need a point guard? And he's like, unequivocally, yes. You kind of look at what the Julius Randle hub offense looked like this season, and it's like, that's not going to work in the new NBA. And then you factor in the two timelines that they're on, where they have 5 guys that are, over 32 years old, and the rest of the roster is pretty much all under 26 and nowhere in between. Like, at some point, you got to pick a direction. And it seems like this offseason is going to be the time for them to pick that direction.
Yeah, most definitely. I feel like the lack of a natural table setter, like you said, was just such a big problem all season long. And at points, it looked like it was getting better. But yeah, I think that contributes to a lot of things. Like you said, with Jaden, I feel like part of it is on coaching just to utilize him a little bit better, but part of it is on his teammates to get him more involved. Maybe part of it's a little bit on him to be more aggressive, but it's just, I feel like that contributed to it. And then really everyone else, there's so many times watching this team where it was like, it's only Ant and Julius touching the ball, and it's not in like these nice 2-man game actions. It's just your turn, my turn kind of thing. And I feel like that's where their offense reverted a lot of the time. And that was a massive problem throughout the year. And yeah, I think part of it is like just simple roster construction can fix a lot of these issues. And then, I mean, the other guy I feel like he just wasn't involved in the offense much and generally took it well would be Gobert, obviously. But then even going back to that, when was it, in February against the Pelicans when they lost that game, and he was like, if players aren't playing with effort, they should be benched. And I feel like his frustrations were really valid at that point because he gets benched all the time for not providing enough on offense, which I think is totally reasonable. But when other players aren't held to that same standard, I can see why that's frustrating. And when he's just pretty much setting screens the entire time in offense, I can see why he would be frustrated by that. So yeah, I definitely think they need to get some sort of a natural point guard or just like somebody who's more comfortable in that playmaking role.
Absolutely agree. And for Gobert, I mean, the amount of times that guy gets hit in the head per game, and then you're right, he gets benched for Naz if they're down in the fourth quarter. Like, I'm sure it gets old when you see guys not running all the way to the corners on fast breaks or not contesting off of drives. I do think, another thing that's kind of stuck with me all season is I remember, I think it was after the Brooklyn loss, I asked Gobert, like, you've been on a lot of really good teams, right? Like, you've been on Utah teams that have been the 2 seed. This Minnesota team was a high seed not too long ago. Like, what is with this team and those teams? And Gobert's, I'm paraphrasing, but his assessment was basically like, this team's too talented. Like, there's not enough guys that are here because of effort, and there's too many guys that are here because of talent, which, if you look at those really good teams, there's usually a couple Royce O'Neals or a couple guys that are just gamers that do all of the little things. And on this Wolves team, until they traded for Ayo, it was honestly like really only Donte that was doing those kind of gritty things, and Rudy to some extent. And I do wonder if that's going to be part of the move this offseason too, is, getting a true lead guard next to Ants, whether that's a whatever version of a true point guard exists now, or just like a guy that's more comfortable running offense, like plays offense. And then getting some more of those, like, just, the Kyle Andersons of the world that just aren't maybe the most gifted athletic and talent wise, but just found a way. Because I do think those guys motivate the star players at times to kind of get into that extra gear as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but when you're talking about trying to build an ideal team around Ant, it can be tricky because he is so heliocentric and he's one of the best scorers in the league. It's not a knock against him, but you also need somebody with those off-ball capabilities. In addition to being a high-level finisher, I feel like that's something this team has really lacked until Io, but you also need somebody who's comfortable playing off the ball in addition to the playmaking, the creation. So I feel like that's something to evaluate with whatever trade target we're talking about. But yeah, I definitely agree. And I mean, the Io point's really big, I feel like, because well, record-wise, it didn't totally bear out. I feel like he did bring the team a new sense of energy, and I think part of that is also just being on the Bulls for his entire career. I think he made the playoffs his rookie year, but then after that, they were just in this like playing purgatory, and I feel like it just gave him a huge boost to have a guy who's a little bit more hungry. He wants to go on a real playoff run for the first time in his career. And I feel like maybe looking at some guys who might not have been on a good team for most of their career or haven't been on a good team in a while could also be beneficial. Because when you look at this team, going back to like the idea of running it back and continuity last offseason, I feel like that did hurt them in some ways. Especially looking at just like the hungriness factor from like day one. It was like, oh, we're on cruise control until the playoffs. We were a 6th seed last year and we made the conference finals. We're good. We're going to do it again. And I feel like there was a lot of like arrogance with that mindset as well.
No, I think you hit the nail completely on the head. There was a lot of kind of arrogance to it of, we'll play when we want to play type of things. I think there was also a lot of frustration with that internally on the team of, why isn't X, Y, or Z player playing harder? Why isn't this person like rising to these occasions against the bad teams? I know with the coaching staff, it was a lot of frustrations because like they know it's possible. Like these guys are extremely talented and it bore out against the Denver Nuggets in the playoffs. Like they are so talented that they can just take, even as a shell of themselves, they can knock out a good team. I mean, the Nuggets, were like on a 16-game winning streak before the playoffs. Like recency bias is going to forget how good that team was to end the season. And the Wolves just like punched them in the mouth and beat them. I really, the other thing with next season is, or I'll back up a little bit. The other thing this season, I think running it back, we did learn a couple things at least of like, I had always wanted to see what Ant would look like as the James Harden type of heliocentric, where it's just like you put players around him, let Ant cook. Ant was able to do that for, I'd say, like a third of the season where Julius was either not playing super well. It didn't look good. Like Ant is just not going to be a James Harden type playmaker when he's in charge of the offense. I think the other thing is like Jaden is really good. Like I think Jaden is better than a lot of people anticipated he would be this season, especially down the stretch. And like the guy just needs usage, which again, at some point we'll get into the trade side of it, but like there's a world where the Wolves pivot and it's just like, all right, Jaden, you're the number 2 now. Let's see what you can do until the trade deadline, which I'd be interested in that because I think he showed a lot at the end of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with both of those points. I mean, I want to talk about Jaden real quick, but yeah, before that, I feel like throughout the season, how many times did we hear with this team, oh, we just didn't listen to the game plan? And then Finch had that famous quote, I think maybe it was after game 2 against the Nuggets when they won. He's like, they lied to us about listening to the game plan, and now they responded, and now the series is tied up 1-1. But I feel like you could see some of the strengths of this coaching staff in the games where they did follow the game plan and they did execute. and especially that Nuggets series. And then, yeah, with Jaden, obviously that was his massive series. It felt like, in some ways, his coming out party in terms of just like national audience. I feel like he got a lot more eyeballs in him on him based on that series. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I know you've been one of the biggest Jaden proponents in Wolves media, and I'm right there with you. I wrote so many articles about this guy just needed more touches in the offense, a bigger role, found new angles to attack it with. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we saw, as we talked about earlier, Conley mentioning that at his press conference. And I do feel like maybe they trade for a guy that's like a borderline all-star, or even like just a high-level starter.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, do they not have a second option? It's like Jaden, I think, can scale up to be that. And yeah, I mean, his 3-level scoring just took a real step up. I feel like he's long been one of the better finishers in the league. And then this year, being able to attack from the mid-range game more, really consistent aggression, I feel like. There was maybe a couple games where that wavered, but in general, he was super aggressive. And then shooting above 40% from 3, I mean, that's massive. He can score at all 3 levels. He has elite size. I feel like he's just such a weapon, especially in a modern-day NBA, and he hasn't truly hit his prime yet. He's going to be 26 before next season, so I think we could see a huge leap where he's flirting with all-star status.
I appreciate you saying I'm one of the Jaden pushers in the Wolves media. I mean, I just like the dude. He's super fun to talk to. I think he's hilarious. And then it's also like his game is just, like in the modern NBA, everybody's game is so kind of familiar, right? Like if you're a lead guy in AAU and in high school and middle school going up, you're going to get the ball a ton, and you end up kind of turning into the Cooper Flagg, Anthony Edwards, ball dominant guy that just can do a little bit of everything. And then everyone else is just kind of either like a 3-and-D guy or just like a microwave guy. And in Jaden, you just have this really weird, like he dribbles it up next to his chin sometimes. He doesn't really have like a bag that he goes to. There's spin moves and slow steps and all this weird stuff. But then he's just super efficient in the mid-range. He's super efficient on these like post pull-ups. He shot 50, 40, 80 last season on like pretty good volume, averaging 16 points a game. And he doesn't shoot free throws. I mean, he shot, bringing it up here, 2.4 free throws a game and still averaged 15 points. Like, there's a lot more for him to develop on offense. And I think, unfortunately, the last 2 years, they've come into the season saying they've wanted Jaden to take this leap, but then they've kind of just never been able to give him the keys, right? They trade for Julius and Donte right before the season, and whatever plans you had for Jaden 2 years ago are just thrown out the window because now you have to figure out a new offense. And then last year they were just dealing with so much of the like your turn, my turn, there's no point guard, weird vibes around the team that until Ant got hurt, he never really got the keys to it either. But like when he got him, he was great. Like I'll never forget, like Mike Conley midway through the season compared him to Kyle Anderson, of just like, he can make plays, he's good passing out of the post, like he has kind of a slow step like Kyle does now, and he's just a really smart player, which Mike doesn't throw that stuff around very often, so it's always stuck with me of like, there has to be something more with Jaden. So I've kind of gotten this new theory of like, he's just kind of playing to the crowd as like the aloof basketball player, when really he's like a closet genius, which hopefully we get to find out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He reminds me a lot of OG Anunoby, and then even like, this is obviously a super lofty comparison, but like Kawhi Leonard, just in terms of like, it might not, especially like in terms of the OG comparison, like it might not, like you were saying, look exactly like aesthetically pleasing all the time, but it's super duper effective, and he can score at all 3 levels. And I really like the point about like the playmaking, and like you were saying, what Mike was talking about. I feel like he was one of the better like initiators of the offense, and with Ant and Julius, we just never really got to see that a whole lot. But when he did, it was really effective. And in terms of guys that were getting Gobert involved, I feel like he's near the top of that list, if not at the top of the list. I feel like that pick and roll game was very effective, and when it was utilized, I mean, it got good results. And he was one of the guys, I feel like, that maybe it is because he was often in the corner, and then when he's getting the ball and operated in this more so lead initiator role, that he's focused on getting others involved, but I feel like he did a really nice job of that in addition to the scoring leap. So yeah, super excited to see what next year has in store for him.
He has been saying all season, uh, sarcastically and not sarcastically, that he could play point guard. And I've kind of joked about it quite a bit online. I'm just like, I want 2 weeks. Just give him 2 weeks to be point guard. Like, it can't be worse than some of the moments we had this season. So, like, let's just see. Maybe Jaden can be Pippen after all.
Exactly, yeah, and that's the perfect comparison, really. In some ways, obviously I'm not going to say he's going to be some all-time top 25 level player of all time, but just that versatile point forward type of guy. That's the ideal vision, absolutely. I think shifting gears a little bit before we get into some of these trade talks, I do want to talk about Ayo because he is a free agent. I think he would like to resign. Conley said he'd like to have him back, so I would consider it likely that he returns. You look at the extension offer, I believe it's 53 million for 3 years if he signs before free agency, or he can hit the open market, and the Wolves can match any offers. He's not a restricted free agent, but they can go over the tax to pay him whatever because they have the bird rights. So yeah, what are you looking at in terms of a potential deal, and do you consider it almost a certainty that he's going to be back?
I don't know if I would say it's a certainty, which I mean, it's just things in life, right? Like, you never know who's going to get traded, what's going to happen, where things are going to go. But like, the teams that have cap space to just sign him outright are not great teams. And Io, since the second he landed in Minnesota, talked about how important being on a winning team was to him, and how, like, his words, not mine, like how blessed he was to be in a position to make an impact on a winning team and be in the playoffs. And I think that stuff really matters to him. He also got along really well with Ant and Jaden, got along really well with Mike, which I would assume if Mike's getting a vet minimum, it's probably to come back to Minnesota. Like, that stuff matters. He also really liked Finch and Pablo Prigioni, which, again, like, if you like your coaches, you like the guard group you're playing with, and you want to win, like, this is a pretty lucrative opportunity to do all of those things. I think my worry with it is you just don't know who's going to make a move to free up cap space, or who could come in and spoil that at the end of the day. Because I was never played basketball out of outside of Chicago until he got traded to Minnesota. So there's just a ton of opportunity and newness to him being a free agent. And excuse me, although he talked profusely about how much he enjoyed his time here, enjoyed the fans, enjoyed his teammates, really liked being in the playoffs, wants to get better. I think he sees a path for him to be like a critical piece on this team. At the same time, it's like he wants to be a free agent and take meetings and do that stuff. So I feel pretty confident, all that being said, that he'll be back here. Again, Finch made no bones about it. He wants Io back. I think Tim doesn't make that trade unless they feel pretty confident that Io would be coming back. And at the end of the day, I think he does come back. I would say it's probably going to be cheaper than people think. Like, I don't think he's going to be getting like a Christian Brown 5 for 125 type of contract anywhere. So it might be just like a little bit over the mid-level for 2 years just to prove himself a little bit more. But I think he'll be back. I think it just, there's too many writings on the wall that kind of point that way.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree. I'm sort of penciling him into the roster next year, but we'll have to see. I mean, you never know. Like you said, I think the one team that like kind of scares me would be the Lakers because they're like the only competitive team with cap space, and then ironically the Hawks, but they have a little bit less cap space than the Lakers. But yeah, I think the Wolves are gonna do whatever it takes to bring him back, really. And you look at it financially, they're $27 million below the second apron, but they also have 7 free agents. So I feel like a good chunk of that will be devoted to Io, and then seeing how you can round out the roster from there. I think we can talk about that a little bit more with trades. It's like, do they need to look at trades from a financial standpoint where you're taking back less money? But yeah, regardless, I think Io is really a seamless fit. With this team since day one. I mean, in terms of just basketball wise, a guy that can provide a little bit of everything was something they desperately needed. I'm a big fan of his shot creation. I don't think that's like the first thing people would mention, but I feel like that's an area for him to potentially scale up. But beyond that, His defense is really solid, connective playmaking, ability to play off the ball and spot up. He really can do it all. And then just the blazing speed that he has, both in the half court and transition, I feel like that was a huge boost to this team. And I feel like he's just a perfect fit next to Ant as a malleable guard that can play on and off the ball. Whether you get another star in there or not, I feel like he has to kind of stay for the future. I feel like he's just so essential, and he fills in that like Nikhil Alexander Walker void a little bit too. In terms of the contract, I've been kind of debating back and forth with that 3 years for $53 million extension that he could take right before free agency. And I that's slightly above the mid level, and I've been talking myself into maybe that's just what he ends up taking. I feel like that was my mindset before the playoffs, and then he has that 43-point game in game 4, and it's like, yeah, he might be getting paid a little bit more, almost solely based off that game. But especially with his desire to test the open market, maybe I could see it going to like the 18, 19, $20 million range, but I don't think anything too far beyond that.
That's kind of where I have him slotted in, is probably closer to the 18 than the 20, but like also if it's an extra $1 million to keep him here, like I don't think the Wolves are gonna like balk at that. If it's like an extra $15 million to keep him here, I think the Wolves back up pretty quickly. But like, yeah, I think it's going to be around probably like that 18 over 2 years, so like 2 years 36, 2 years 40, somewhere in there. And again, that puts him at being a free agent right when he hits 28, 29 years old, and sets him up for another big contract or even a max contract if he proves it. Um, you mentioned like the other free agents, like let's be honest, Bones is probably back. Tim Connelly loves the dude, and Bones is probably a minimum player still. Like, bring him back for vibes alone. Jalen Clark is a restricted free agent. I'd be surprised if anyone like offers anything considerable for him. I mean, he's still kind of an injury prone. His 3-point shooting fell off considerably, so I'd expect Clark to be back. Outside of that, though, like I do think we're going to see a lot of new faces. Whether that's, I think Joe, I don't know if he's officially retired yet, but he's signed with the National Basketball
Australia.
League in Australia. Mike, I think, is going to be coming back as a vet minimum. Wouldn't be surprised if Kyle is back as a vet minimum. He's one of those connectors. But of the players that aren't free agents are kind of the ones that I'm thinking are going to get the most toss up.
Yeah, most definitely. I feel like most of the free agents they'll try to bring back, especially like Mike and Bones, and even Kyle to a lesser extent. I think those first two, Mike and Bones in particular, like you said, with the Tim Conley connection with Bones, and then just Mike, how important he's been to the team. I feel like those two are kind of shoo-ins to come back. And then Kyle, I feel like he has a great relationship with Finch, great relationship with the rest of the team. I think he'll likely come back as well. But then from there, who knows? And I feel like luckily all three of those guys, and then even Jalen Clark, like you mentioned, um, all three, four of those guys will be pretty easy to sign to cheap deals. So
Yeah.
that helps financially, especially if you're devoting a big portion of your cap space currently to Io. But yeah, I think the next thing we got to talk about is the trades and who could potentially be on the move, what they should potentially target, and then after that, maybe a little bit of Giannis talk, even though I just have a hard time, spoiler alert, seeing a scenario where they can pull that one off, but you never know. I think the first guy we got to talk about is Randall. I feel like he's the most likely trade candidate, but yeah. Do you see a scenario where he's potentially brought back, or are you sort of marking him as off the team next year?
I don't. I'll be honest, and part of this is because like I do like Julius Randle, the person. Always been kind to me. Did some charity stuff with him. He's just a good dude. And that's kind of the tough part of like discussing Randall, because he off the court he is like a very good dude. Like, he's talked quite a few times of like how he's gonna have memories from like the Target Center and people cheering on his kid and stuff like that like he takes with him forever. That being said, the basketball fit here just never worked. Like, an ISO dominant player that has built his entire career on scoring, now being kind of in his 30s, forced to morph into like a diet LeBron. It just, historically, that doesn't work. And I think Randall did the best he could with it. But at some point, whether it was this season, as John Kay kind of alluded to, the trade rumors that just kind of finally broke the back, or if it was just throw your hands up in the air moment of just like, I don't know what you want me to do, like this isn't my game. It does seem like bringing him back would just continue a situation that's not really that tenable on the court or off the court as well. I mean, that's probably your best trade chip still, too, even with the playoffs. Like, I think teams can talk themselves into being able to fix Randle, which I don't really know if there's anything to fix with him. Like, honestly, you put Julius Randle on the Pacers instead of Siakam, and Randall's probably an all-star in bringing them into the playoffs because he's just going to be able to do Julius Randle things, right? It's just he's not allowed to do Julius Randle's things as much here with the Wolves without like a collective groan from everybody on the bench and in the stands and everywhere else. So I think he's going to be moved, and I do think the value on Randle is going to be higher than people expect. Like, the people that think he's just going to get traded for like a spare set of tires, he's gonna get back a starting caliber player and maybe even a pick.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It is tough because I think I said this when I was on your show back in April, where I'm like, I'm kind of against trading Randall at all costs, but then the playoffs played out, and I was like, yeah, you kind of have to trade Randall, especially after that Spurs series.
Yeah.
It felt like, yeah, it reached its breaking point, without a doubt. But yeah, like you, I have always been kind of like pro Randall in some ways. I feel like he's underrated. I feel bad for the guy just hearing him talk about like how he's been moved or traded so many different times, and he feels like Minnesota was his home, and then for it to really not work out this year after a strong start.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to see that from the human perspective, but yeah, basketball wise, it's a rough fit, and I feel like this really hammered home like the need for a player with off-ball capabilities next to Ant. Whether that be a guard, forward, wing, whatever position. I just think you need somebody who's comfortable playing off the ball. Of course, you do need some of that on-ball juice, but having that isocentric of a player next to Ant, who's already isocentric, it was just a poor fit. And then, I mean, when you have Naz Reid and you paid him 5 year, 125 million contract, he's one of the more beloved players in franchise history, waiting for a bigger role, and he has that awesome series against the Spurs, and he can just fit in with any lineup because of his quick decision making ability, his 3-point shooting. It kind of just makes it a no brainer at this point. But yeah, in terms of his value, I do agree it's going to be higher than some people might be expecting. I feel like I've heard some people throw around this idea that it's going to be like, oh, a salary dump to Brooklyn. I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's going to be the case at all. I don't think Tim Connelly would do it. I feel like there are enough teams where you can talk yourself into like a swapping of problems of sorts. If that makes sense. I feel like despite his flaws, there are a lot of other players who are at a similar level, and teams could be looking to upgrade that like forward spot. We can talk about some suitors and trade potential in a second, but yeah, I do feel like he is going to have some solid value. And then the other thing is that gets under discussed, I think, including with a potential Rudy trade, is just the value of floor raisers now. I feel like has gone up with these new lottery odds, where it's pretty much flattened across the board. So some of these lottery teams that are rebuilding, he might not be a perfect fit for their core or their timeline, whatever. I think they're going to just try to look to raise their floor, and I feel like that could, pick up the market for Randall a bit. But yeah, are there any potential teams that you could see as suitors or players you're targeting in a Randall trade?
Players are always tough for me because I think, like DeJounte Murray, right? I think he would fit really well with Ant. Strong defensive guy, can play without the ball. He's shared the backcourt with McCollum, Derek White, and Jordan Poole for a little bit. Like, the guy's obviously able to kind of blend in where he needs to be. He's kind of the prototypical, kind of like what you said, of just like swapping your problems. Like, he's a very injured. It has a real chance of his career going down the same way Malcolm Brogdon's did, where it's just too many injuries and you're done. Another guy I really like is Jeremy Grant. I don't know if Tim Connelly and him have a relationship after Jeremy left Denver to go to Detroit, but I think he would be a lot of fun here. If there's any way to get like a Mikal Bridges somehow in a 3-way deal, like, I think there's guys out there that would fit this team what they need, just like all around pretty decent defender, moves the ball willingly, and can do a little bit on their own. The reason I say it's like tough for me to nail down just specific names is because if I'm New Orleans, why the heck would I give up DeJounte Murray? Like, you don't have a really young backcourt outside of Queen that I think you're feeling, or fears that you're feeling good about. And DeJounte probably fits pretty well next to Fears into the future if you're New York, why would you trade Mikal Bridges? Like, he's been a big piece of this team that's in the West or Eastern Conference Finals. Jeremy Grant, big piece of a young Portland team. I'm able to almost talk myself out of any player that I would want to trade Julius Randle for. So then I focus more on, like you brought up, the teams of just, I think Phoenix should be really interested in a Julius Randle. Like, Devin Booker's a little bit more mature on the same timeline as Julius Randle. Randle can give them juice. You can market him to your fans. If you're Dallas, I don't think you're getting Kyrie back. I'm sorry. Anyone that has that pipe dream, I don't know if it's just a Julius Kyrie swap, but like Julius next to Cooper with a big that's a little bit more, versatile and lively coming back from injury, probably hastens your development and getting into the playoffs. Portland, I think you would fit well if they could get rid of and consolidate some of their bigs and then pivot to getting a Randle in there with a couple defensive guards. I think that would work. There's really a lot of teams I think that could look at Julius and say, if we get the best version of this dude, it's a borderline all-star that can get you 24 any given night. And that's kind of why I think his value is going to be a lot higher than a salary dump to Brooklyn. Like, there are going to be teams that talk themselves into it and then get into kind of a bidding situation, which hope that's the best case scenario for Connelly, is you're then trading a guy that has a 1+1 left on his deal, and you're kind of saving that asset slot from that cat trade.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think there's several teams around the league that could be interested in him. The DeJounte Murray fit is one that I'm super intrigued by. But yeah, like you said, I feel like him and Zion is just such a tough fit. I feel like they're just so similar. It would likely have to be a three-team deal, or you're looking to give up something else for Murray. But yeah, I feel like Murray is a perfect fit with Ant. Maybe not in terms of the off-ball play. That I feel like that's one potential hindrance. But in terms of just a guy that can defend at a really high level, generate rim pressure, play make. I feel like he'd fit in super nicely, great for himself. He checks a lot of boxes, what I think the Timberwolves should be looking for from a potential point guard. So that's an idea that's been thrown around. I think it would have to be a three-team deal. And I love the Phoenix fit because they just need that bruising power forward. And I've seen this deal going around social media that I think all three teams could potentially talk themselves into, where you have Jalen Green going to New Orleans, DeJounte going to Minnesota, and then Randle going to Phoenix. I feel like that could make some level of sense for all three teams. It's financially possible as well. But you look at Jalen Green in that backcourt long-term with Fears, I feel like he fits their timeline a little bit better. Upside swing there. And then Randle, I feel like, complements Booker nicely in some ways. And then he just fills that clear need of a bruising power forward on that team. So I think that's a possibility. The Dallas thing's really interesting because I am one of those people who is very much on the Kyrie train. I don't think it would be like, oh, you just swap Julius and Kyrie. I feel like it might have to be maybe you throw in like a Terrence Shannon or something. Maybe you throw in pick 28.
Oh, I was just saying, money-wise, you'd have to throw TJ in, which I think would make the Mavs probably really interested of, like, we get Julius and TJ, but from the Wolves' perspective, that's a tough pill to swallow on a guy that hasn't played basketball in like 16 months, or that wouldn't have played basketball in like 16 months by the time the season starts.
Yeah, most definitely. I think Kyrie, there is some level of risk there in terms of trading for a 34-year-old coming off that ACL injury who you haven't seen return. Whereas like with DeJounte, you did see him return from that Achilles injury, and he was really solid in the 20 or so games he played in the regular season. But man, I think Kyrie is the perfect fit next to Ant in terms of a guy who can generate rim pressure, score at all three levels. Obviously, he has incredible handles, and then he can play off the ball. I feel like that's the big selling point for me, especially playing next to Luka a couple years ago during that finals run. I feel like all of that together really makes him the perfect point guard next to Ant in some ways. He might not be your like traditional table setter, but he's good enough at those skills. And then what he brings to the table in terms of creation and just being able to take away some of that burden from Ant, I think would be absolutely massive. So I think Kyrie would be my personal top trade target at this point. And it's worth noting that John Kay said today that they are interested in Kyrie. So I feel like he's the number one name I'm monitoring at this point. I do think it would be more likely a three-team deal just because, at least me personally, I don't like the idea of like Randle and Flag if I'm the Mavericks. So I think it could be a three-team deal where Randle goes elsewhere and then maybe some more picks go back to the Mavericks side, but I think that could potentially work out nicely. I think Kyrie, like I said, top trade target at this point. I'll throw out another team, and that would be the Miami Heat. Um, I believe it was at the 25 trade deadline they had interest in him, and even before that, in the 24 offseason, they also had interest in Randall. And I think if it's either Norman Powell sign and trade or sort of a one-for-one swap for Tyler Hero, I think that could be advantageous for both teams. When you look at the Heat, Hero and Powell just didn't share the court at all much once Hero came back from that injury, and they're just super similar, so I feel like they're going to look to get off of one of them. If you can get some value back for Powell, who is a free agent, I feel like that's a big benefit to the Heat. Or if you can just sort of trade Hero, re-sign Powell, and then bring in Randall, I feel like that makes some level of sense. And then when you look at Randall next to like Bam or Khalil Ware, I feel like that does make sense as well because of their floor spacing. And then for Minnesota, you can get some shooting, some extra creation. Probably not the playmaking you're looking for, but I feel like either Powell or Hero can provide enough playmaking to where it's worth it. So yeah, any thoughts on a potential Miami trade?
Miami's always interesting because I've admittedly never been a big Hero guy. Like I just there's just the like not a very good defender, kind of one-dimensional just as a scorer on offense guys that I struggle to like get behind and root for just as like a basketball preference. Norman Powell I think would be interesting, but then again it's kind of the same. You're not getting any younger. You're getting a guy that probably doesn't fix the like distribution problem. But like in the Norman Powell trade, the side of that I really like is then you are giving the keys over to Aunt Jaden Naz and saying, and Ayo when he inevitably resigns. Like then you're saying, hey, like you four, this is your go at it. Like let's see what you can do. You have Powell that's going to be a vet off the bench. Rudy's probably still hanging around in that situation. Bones off the bench as well. Like let's see what the young guys can do. The one there's the other thing that's just intriguing to me is the three-way trade side of it, because you look at like the Clippers, they're in salary cap kind of hell right now. They're going to dip under the second apron after the draft and be able to probably make one move, like is bringing Julius in. And again, you're probably not getting Darius Garland back, but like, Julius goes to the Clippers send salary stuff to Dallas, and then Kyrie comes to Minnesota. Like, does that make sense? The Miami side of it, like if you rope in a three-way trade that way where Julius is going to Miami, Tyler Hero is going somewhere else, and then you're bringing in someone that makes a little bit more sense, like that could be intriguing. Unfortunately, a lot of like those trades when it comes to Miami, Dallas, San Antonio, like those teams, the Giannis domino is going to have to fall first, I think. And if last offseason's any indication of what that's going to look like this offseason, it might take a very long time for that domino to fall. And I don't know if you can start next season with the same roster. Like, I don't think you can come back next year and have a successful season with, Randall, no point guard, Ayo, Jaden, Ant, and Rudy. Something has to give. So it's going to be a really weird offseason with that Giannis trade looming over it. And it doesn't sound like he's really putting out any of the fires that he's going to get traded, nor is he really putting any confidence into him not getting traded, which kind of tells me that this is going to be another 5 months of, where is Giannis going to go talk while everyone else kind of waits.
Yeah, man, the Giannis domino is huge, and I just hope for my personal sanity that it happens quickly. Because I cannot, just as an NBA fan, and then especially as someone who covers the Timberwolves, I just can't take the constant Giannis updates that aren't truly updates, but you kind of have to treat them like they're updates. It's kind of rough. I do think I can't remember who said it, but it was somebody on ESPN, not Shams, who said basically the Bucks are looking to trade Giannis before the draft, which I think could just open up everything for the Timberwolves, but then just for the entire NBA offseason, we just wouldn't have to deal with this whole Giannis saga anymore. So hopefully that's true, but you really never know. But yeah, I do think that's a great point. Just it's especially if you're talking about like a deal with the Heat, who are also very much in this Giannis race. I feel like that could be big. So yeah, we'll have to see how that plays out. But yeah, I mean, I definitely agree in terms of like Hero and Powell aren't ideal fits. I think the Heat are sort of my team where it's like if you can't get
Yeah.
a big blockbuster 3-team deal, you go to Miami, who has expressed interest in him, and you try to get one of those two. I feel like that does make some level of sense. And then in terms of Powell, if it is a sign and trade, I could see him maybe signing a deal worth like 25 million, so then you save 8 million in cap, have a little bit of extra flexibility there. But yeah, we'll have to see how it plays out. The other guy I want to talk about a little bit is Rudy. Because his future is not as clear as Randall's, but I don't think it would shock anybody, especially with Conley's comments and the idea to get on Ant's timeline if he was traded. So yeah, what do you see as some like the pros and cons there, and then do you more so expect him to be back, or is it like 50-50?
With Rudy, I would say I'd say it's like 60-40. Like I do think he has had a really big impact on this team's, we talk about emotional maturity, like for all the weirdness that comes with Rudy Gobert at times, whether it's the, really into crystal healing, darkness retreats, like that side of it, he also is an adult. Like I don't think he's eaten a carb in like 35 years. He's everyone kind of jokes about like his house is basically just like any rehab device that you've ever thought of. Rudy owns it. And people do genuinely like him on the team. Like, I think people get frustrated with him at times because of the offensive stuff, and his turnovers are loud turnovers. But I don't think he's one of the guys that people were referring to when they said moodiness. Like, Rudy is pretty even keeled, locked in. You mentioned the term floor raiser before. Like, that's what Rudy is. Like, he gives you a chance in every game because he just cares a lot. And I think that means something. I don't know if it means that he's going to be on this team next year, but I do think it means at least something in the grand scheme of things. Now, that being said, like if they're going for Giannis, Rudy's not here. Like they're going to need to clear up salary and sign in trades, probably get more picks of assets. If they are moving Randle and the best player they can get back is like a 23-year-old center, Rudy's probably not here because they're not going to like mortgage their future again betting on Rudy Gobert being able to play really good basketball. They've already done that, and to some extent they've won that bet, but now he's in his early 30s. It's just tough. So kind of the scenario I see is Randall getting moved, Naz moving up to that starting power forward spot. If they're able to get a starting guard for Randall, that guard is playing alongside Ant in the starting lineup. And if not, they try and get a really good role player that can come off of the bench, like a borderline starter guy, and then maybe like a pick way out in the future. And in that world, Rudy comes back because he does raise the floor so much for this team. And like, I think when you are going to move Nas into the starting lineup, Nas has been kind of a defensive liability at times, and when you put him next to Rudy, that isn't the case. Nas plays really well next to Rudy. I also think the Johan factor of it as well, of if you can get one more year out of Gobert, then you probably trade him next summer, or he picks up his player option and you sign and trade him to an extension, and you just buy one more year for Johan to develop, which Johan's talked about how much Rudy has meant to his development. So if you're playing kind of a longer game, it probably makes sense to keep Rudy. But also, as everyone will to say this offseason until they're blue in the face, like Ants opens the window now. So every year is a championship opportunity, and are you willing to punt on one of those or not put the best roster forward because you want to keep Rudy around for some of the young guys, which that's a tough decision.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is a really tricky decision, and it's kind of a dilemma like we've seen with Rudy. I mean, throughout his time here, I feel like he has been absolutely tremendous, and he's raised the floor so much, and the defense has been incredible, and I feel like he's just truly transformed the culture as well.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't think you make back to back conference finals without him. You definitely don't get to
No.
the second round this year without him. And the defense he had against Jokic in the first round was incredible. But this is the second straight year, and this is where I kind of lean towards the idea that he's going to get traded. And I wouldn't guarantee it. I would say more so in that like 60-40, 70-30 range. But this is the second year in a row where he's struggled against one of the league's truly elite defenses. And maybe it is, hey, when he's playing next to Naz instead of Julius, it just opens up so much for him, regardless of what it opens up for Ant and everyone else. But maybe that lessens his offensive issues a little bit. But I feel like when you're looking to compete with the Spurs and the Thunder, I just don't think he's the ideal center offensively to get you there. But it is really complicated because of just how elite he is as a defender still. And I would say outside of Wemby, he's still probably the best defender in the league. Maybe you want to go with like a perimeter guy like a Sar Thompson, whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's a really tough dilemma. And then I think it just changes your focus. With trading him and Randall, I feel like you just have to get at least one like rim protector back. I don't think you're gonna run Naz at the five. He's played out of position for far too long. Play him as a four, please. And then I don't think you can just throw Johan into the fire, even though I would like to see him play like a consistent 15 minutes a game. I don't think you can say, Johan, start in center, let's go win a championship. I don't think that's realistic at all. So I just think it would change your priorities a lot if you're like determined to moving off of both of them. But then also with like Conley's comments about being super aggressive and everything's on the table, I'm kind of reading between the lines a little bit, and I'm thinking maybe they are going to go sort of all in on this Ant timeline. I don't think it's totally possible. I mean, you look at the trade candidates we listed outside of Hero, like everyone is still sort of on that older timeline,
Yeah.
but maybe you get a Nick Claxton back for Julius Randle. You get maybe like Murray back for Gobert or something, and you reshuffle the cards that way. But I'm definitely not opposed to him coming back just because of the defensive floor he gives you. So yeah, it's really up in the air.
I really appreciated that you mentioned the playoff stuff because Rudy gives you a standard in the regular season where I think you should be a 50 plus win team. This Wolves team didn't win 50 games, and that's not because of Rudy Gobert. Like Rudy played well enough to win 50 games. It's the rest of these knuckleheads that at times didn't. And that's important. Like that gets you to the playoffs just by Gobert. I think Finch said it a couple times this year of like Rudy Gobert is just a walking top 10 defense and it doesn't matter who's around him. Like that stuff matters in the regular season, and he had an all-world performance with Jokic where he just kind of broke him, which we've never really seen before. So he's still a valuable player, but like Wemby and OKC are going to be who you face in the conference finals or semifinals every year from now until probably Ant retires. That's just the reality of it. So Rudy has shown in the past that he's okay taking a lesser role in those playoff series that call for it. So is there a way where you can move a Randall insert Naz Reid, and then you just get a better like fitting stretch big that can play, spot starts in matchups that aren't good for Rudy, and Rudy kind of transitions to a different stage of his career in the playoffs where if the matchup's there, it's there. If it's not, it's not. Like that's an option to keep him. I think the other option would be to you trade Gobert and bring in, like you said, a Claxton, or I mean Jarrett Allen, I think is another guy in like a three-way trade sense where the Cavs kind of need to free up space. Allen theoretically kind of fits what Gobert does, but he's younger and a little more spry. And then you just let Johan be that guy next year and hope that he's ready by playoffs. I think with Tim, when they're talking about making big moves and splashes and like the risk adverse side of it, like they're not going to shy away from making those moves. It's just kind of another thing that I think is important is saving the salary cap slots for these guys, because in this new apron kind of world, like if Julius Randle walks in free agency, everybody's over the apron, so you don't get like cap relief, you just get more money under the second apron that you could spend on your own guys. So it might be worth trading Rudy for a younger player that makes near the same amount of money as him just to keep that kind of salary block open for a move down the road. And same with Julius, which that's why this offseason is going to be so fun, because something is going to happen, right? Like they can't come back the same, but there's just a dozen different options of what it could look like and what paths they take, while still keeping kind of the 5 or 6 under 26 guys that everybody is hoping can take this team to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. I like some of those potential names that you mentioned with like Jared Allen. I think that would be a really fun one that I hadn't totally thought of. But yeah, I think you really have to assess it from all angles. And I mean, it is tough to potentially think about moving him, especially just given that, like, hey, maybe teams don't want to trade those really valuable rim protectors or stretch bigs. I feel like big men have become such a commodity in the NBA
Yeah.
that it could really be tough. And, I don't think it's a bad idea at all to bring him back. But yeah, super excited to see what they end up doing. I feel like the big name that we haven't talked about yet would be Giannis, and the potential for a trade there, which, yeah, spoiler alert, again, I don't see it as like super realistic, but do you see there being some sort of path for them to trade for Giannis, or do you feel like it's just like Tim Connelly doing his due diligence and seeing if there is a path and just trying to be as aggressive as possible to pair Ant with another top five level guy?
I Two things. I would first start off by saying the Wolves are going to be linked to every trade this entire summer. And Tim Connelly does not leak ever. So, like, unless it's coming from John Krasinski, me, Dane, Jace, Chris, any of the guys that are on the beat, like, it's coming from the other side. So, like, when you hear all of these trade rumors of, like, the Wolves are going after Kevin Durant, the Wolves are going after Trae Young, the Wolves are going after whoever, like, it's probably from the other team's management that's, like, leaking that out to the press to try and, like, drive up value. That being said, my understanding is that the Wolves likely could have gotten Giannis if they included Jaden in that trade mid-season, and that was the sticking point. So if that's still the sticking point, is that we're not trading Jaden McDaniels, and it's not like Jaden for Giannis straight up. It's like Jaden, Julius, you're trading Naz to a third team, getting picks back, and then all of that is going to Milwaukee for just Giannis. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, the Wolves stamped their foot and said, no, we are not trading Jaden McDaniels straight up for Giannis. It's that the Bucks wanted Jaden as their main return from the Wolves. Nas was still getting shipped out. Julius was still getting shipped out. You're probably losing Johan, and then you're trading every pick that you get back and every asset that you get back to the Bucks for Giannis, and then Giannis is joining a team with like Rudy, Ant, and Dante. Like it just I'm not trying to like, be like dismissive of how close it did come this season, but like I'm sure Tim Connelly at a point was like, we're not going to have a roster if we do this. And that's kind of where I feel like it is this summer. Like for what it would take to pull off, you're trading Julius, you're trading Rudy, and then you're probably trading Jaden, all of those picks, and a young guy to Milwaukee, along with all of the returns from the Julius and Rudy trades. And then it's like, yes, you have Giannis, and Giannis is a top 5 player in the league. You're pairing him with Ant, who's in that 6 to 10 range in the league. And historically speaking, if you got 2 out of the top 10 guys, like your championship odds go through the roof. But like, what's the rest of the roster going to be? Like, there's not a lot of good veteran minimums out there right now. You're probably going to end up having Kyle Anderson start for this team and Mike Conley start for this team if that's what it takes to get him. And I just don't think that's worth it. Like, I think if you're looking at roster building and how something could go wrong that would cost you Anthony Edwards, that's kind of where it starts. Like making an all-in move for a guy in his 30s that's had knee, back, ankle, and foot problems. And then that guy gets hurt, and Ant's looking around going, you traded all of my best friends, and now I'm on this team with nothing. That is too risky for me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I've always had a hard time wrapping my head around it from a simple draft capital perspective, and maybe if it's a multi-team deal where they can send, I don't know, maybe Milwaukee really wants Jaden, but maybe it's like they send him to Portland and Portland sends Milwaukee's picks back to them or whatever the case may be. I've just always had a really tough time wrapping my head around it, and I've also come to the conclusion like even if it does happen, I'll probably talk myself into it because
Yeah.
it's like and Giannis, that's insane. That's like the best duo in the league. But I feel like in the modern NBA, depth is super duper important. And it's almost more important than star power. Obviously you do need to have some level of star power, but I feel like you have that with Ant. And just surrounding him with a well-rounded roster, I feel like is more valuable, especially when you look at Giannis's injury history. And yeah, it would be such an all-in move where it's like this is all you have left. And you're probably going to have the worst bench in the league. And then if somebody gets injured, you're completely screwed. So yeah, I don't totally think it's worth it. And then, I mean, again, we go back to the jaded that where we just think he has another level to reach. I think a lot of Wolves fans would agree with that. And trading a guy that's 26 and continuing to grow along with uh, likely two other starters and then potential other young players and draft capital and all that, I feel like it is just a little bit too risky. And I think when you look at just some of these teams that have failed recently, you look at like going back like 5 years ago to like that Nets era with Kyrie, KD, James Harden. It's like, how is anybody going to beat this team? And then like within like 2-3 years, it's like totally destroyed to its studs. And then KD again with the Suns and that big three. I feel like just slapping stars together doesn't totally work, and you do need depth, and you do need to account for fit as well. So yeah,
But
I'm
we
not
can keep
totally.
going down that. I mean, the Clippers with Paul George and Kawhi, it just didn't work. You look at Toronto with Kawhi and a deep team, won a championship. Even Milwaukee, they traded everything to get Dame. I mean, they traded all their picks. They traded Drew Holiday. They broke up the chemistry. They did what the Wolves would be doing to get Giannis to get Dame, and Dame tears his Achilles and it's just over. And now Giannis wants out of Milwaukee. I mean, it rarely goes right. Is kind of the moral of these massive trades, which I'm pretty firmly in the like, if Giannis shows up tomorrow, I get to talk to Giannis, so I'm not going to say I'll be disappointed. But at the same time, like I just want to see what these kids would do. I've always felt like in that Zach LaVine Wiggins Town era, we were kind of robbed by that. Speaking of another push the chips in for a star trade of going, LaVine and draft picks for Jimmy Butler, but like we never saw it through. We never know. We'll never know what that group of three young guys could have done. And I don't want that to happen with Jaden, Naz, and Ant. Like selfishly, I just want to see what happens. I want to see what they could do all in their prime, working together off of the power of friendship.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm happy you brought up those other examples, and especially the Milwaukee and Dame thing. I feel like that's pretty crucial to account for because Giannis and Dame, well, they also did gut their depth, and I think that was a huge reason. They just never totally meshed together. And Dame and Ant, they're different players in some ways, but I do have questions if those two would develop a great two-man game if they could truly complement each other in addition to like the injury concern. So yeah, I feel like there's just so much risk, and yeah, I totally agree. Like this is a team that's been to two conference finals in the past 3 years, obviously like slightly different iterations, but this has been a very, very successful group, and let's just see what it looks like slightly tweaked instead of totally torn down. I feel like if you just get another high level creator next to Ant, especially somebody who's capable of handling the ball and playmaking, I feel like this team could reach another level. And then, especially you pair that with the growth from some of these young guys, I feel like it's definitely possible. And I think it would be better just to see it through. But I mean, if you're looking at the opportunity to add a talent like Giannis, I could totally
Yeah.
see getting talked into that. Yeah.
Yeah, no notes. Like if Giannis is there for a good price, like if they keep Jaden and you're getting if they can keep Jaden, Nas, and Ant, and you're bringing not Giannis in, like 100 times out of 100, whatever you have to do that, like do it. But again, selfishly, those three, I just want to see it. And like you said, whether it's bringing in another creator, even if it's just like a less, what is it, less is more type of trade where you're trading Julius out for Norman Powell and a pick or something like that, where the pecking order just makes more sense. I just want to see it, which that's just me selfishly as like a reporter that's been around this team for a while. I want to know. I want to know the answers of like, can Jaden do X? Is Naz capable of being a starter? And like, can Ant drag this group to the heights? Which the other thing I did want to mention is just your point on depth being kind of the key to the NBA. Look at the teams that are left. Like all of them have 8 or 9 players they can go deep. All of them have multiple different looks they can go to off the bench. They can go big, they can go the small, they can go rim protection, they can go perimeter. Like honestly, each of the last 2 conference finals, like that was one of the things with Dallas. They were a deeper team and they were a little bit better constructed. And last year with OKC, they're still around this year, so they're doing something right. I do think you're right in this kind of new cap era that we're moving into. Depth is huge. I don't know if the super team is going to be as important as it used to be.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I think you can just sort of look around the league, and the common thread is like depth and like mostly homegrown talent.
Yeah.
Obviously, you do still have like some trades. Like you look at the Thunder going out and getting an Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey, stuff like that, where you do shake up your core, but it's mostly homegrown, and it's usually just not like a slap together super team. And those teams just haven't totally worked. But yeah, I mean, going back to your original point about potentially pulling off a deal where you don't give up Jaden, if they're able to do that, build Tim Connelly the statue like on the spot, because that would be his biggest accomplishment yet, and that's saying a lot. Actually, I don't know. He drafted Nikola Jokic in the second round. I don't know if anything could top that, but
Yeah.
yeah, no. Regardless, that would just be incredible. And you know, who knows? I'll never count anything out with Conley. I do want to talk about Nas a little bit more. I feel like we've hit on this offseason throughout many different angles. We talked about Jaden scaling up in a bigger role, but yeah, do you think Nas has another level to reach with this potential new iteration where obviously he's going to get that starting role if Julius is traded and they don't bring in Giannis? But yeah, do you think he's just going to complement the overall starting group more, or do you think he has a potential another level to reach?
You know, my opinion has changed since exit interviews because Nas throughout the regular season has been he's a very proud guy. Like he doesn't talk about his injuries. He doesn't talk about how banged up he is. He just, I mean, the meme that was going around of his like pain is whatever leaving the body or whatever. Like that is kind of how Nas is. But then when I asked him about his shoulder at his exit interview, and he was like, there was weeks I couldn't even shoot a basketball. Like, yeah, kind of checks out. Like he was very inconsistent this year. You look at it from like the death of his sister before the season started to coming into training camp out of shape, which not a shot at Nas. If my brother dies tomorrow, I will not be in shape by October. It's just it would never happen. That's not how humans work. But, you know, that is a factor that Nas didn't come into the season as much is in good as in as good of shape as he normally does. And then you see the injury with the shoulder and the rolled ankles and things like that obviously really affected him more than he ever let on. And you're looking at his season as a whole, and like he was still in the finalists for like sixth player of the year. He still had a good season. He still had moments where he was awesome. And then in the playoffs, whatever they did to that shoulder worked out pretty well because he had a couple of those magnet ball games. If he can just stay healthy and not have like colossal life changing events happen this offseason, I do think he can get more consistent. And that's kind of been my thing with Nas for the last 3 years is just like, how do we not have the games where you go 1 for 11 and also maybe have less of the games where you go 10 for 11 and just have a bunch of games where you're like 6 for 11 so that teams can like bank on your production and know that it's going to be there and there's more kind of an even keel to his game. Honestly, the defense, I think if you put a good enough cast around Nas, you're probably fine with that stuff. Like he's not a sieve, he's just kind of aloof, I would say. Um, but I do think there's another ceiling for him to go to. Again, is that an all-star? Probably not. But is that a guy that can score like 17 a game?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree. It's more so like just based in consistency. I don't think we're going to see some major statistical leap necessarily. I don't think he has like all-star potential like Jaden. You never know, but that's sort of where I'm at right now. I think it's just a little bit more consistency, and we have seen like throughout his career, really dating back, especially these past like 4 years or so. Whenever he has been in the starting lineup for extended stretches, he's performed really, really well, and he's
Mhm.
proven that he can scale up. And be more consistent. I feel like just it's a lot easier to find your rhythm when you're in the starting lineup, and I think that's something he could really benefit from. And then just in terms of like fit, I feel like just having a pure play finisher, guy that can spot up at the four, I feel like is just so much better for this team, so much better for Ant,
A willing
really
passer.
everyone. Yeah, definitely, because I think what I really like about his game is he can spot up and he can offer a little bit of creation, but he also just makes really quick reads.
Hmm.
He's not like some sort of point forward, but he makes the right plays. He does it quickly, and he can provide a little bit of like playmaking if need be. So I feel like that offensive skill set's just so valuable, especially to this team. So I feel like there's gonna be some like addition by subtraction in some ways. With adding him to the starting lineup and then trading away Randall, where I think we'll see more from Jaden, we'll see more from Ant, potentially Io, whoever else. I think it's going to be like purely additive in some ways. And then yeah, I think from him like just a little bit more consistency, like we said. But yeah, super excited to see what's in store for this team next year and throughout the offseason. But yeah, any closing thoughts on Naz or anything else Timberwolves related?
I do want to ask you your thoughts on Dante because I think it's such an one like you never want an Achilles injury to happen to anyone, right? Like that's just a horrific thing to happen to a person whose career depends on their ligaments. But like for Dante, a guy that was like extension eligible this offseason and that was probably going to make $20 million a year, if not more, as being like a starting just gamer, just awful. And now he's in this position where like we see it all the time where injured players get dealt, which the one I always go back to is like Joe Ingles got traded after he blew out his ACL to Portland, and they got Naz Reid or they got Nikhil Alexander Walker in a second round pick back for Joe, and then Joe got cut. So like these things happen. I don't know. What's your thoughts on Dante though? Because I feel pretty confident they're gonna just hold on to that salary slot after media day.
Yeah, I personally do as well. At least maybe that's just like hope because I
Yeah.
really like Dante. I love everything he provides, and like it is really rough when you see like the business side of it. Sometimes I remember like even like 10 years ago, like Isaiah Thomas with the Celtics, he
Yep.
messed up his hip and he was battling through that in the playoffs and all that, and then he gets traded. But yeah, maybe it's just like the human perspective. I just don't want to see that happen to Dante, and I feel like to me like the easiest path would be to sort of restructure his contract because he is entering free agency next year. So maybe give him a little bit less money this year, and then next year you can have that extra security, so he doesn't have to go through like the uncertainty of like free agency after the Achilles injury. I feel like that's just like the classic like do right by Dante move that
Yeah.
I think makes a lot of sense. And then, yeah, just in general, I think he's so important to the team. Even if he's not on the court, he can be helpful. I think he's in terms of like leadership, he's like at the top of the list. It's like guys that just seem like really good leaders. He won a championship with Milwaukee, so I feel like he's just super valuable. And I mean, throughout the offseason, I do think that's something they have to keep in mind. Like, how do you fill that void in terms of like a guy that's gritty and he's willing to do all the dirty work and then also provides a ton of 3 point shooting. Maybe that's making Io more of a shooter. Maybe that's like drafting like a pure spot up guy. That's something I'm looking ahead to with the draft a little bit. But
Hmm.
yeah, I feel it was just gut wrenching to see. Right, 30 or so seconds into that game four, it was just really brutal. So yeah, I'm hoping they can just find a way to sort of restructure that contract and keep him around because I think he's been such a valuable addition to the team, and it would it just wouldn't like totally sit right with me. Like I'm not gonna like be like, oh, I'm not gonna cover the Timberwolves anymore because they traded Dante, but I would just feel like morally like not the best in my opinion if they like included him in a trade.
It wouldn't feel like a Tim Connelly thing. Like Tim Connelly just I mean everything he's done as a GM has been kind of to take care of his guys. Like I'm with you. I don't know if it's a lot of just blind optimism because I still have hope in humanity, but man, I hope he they do right by him, because like that guy sacrificed everything, literally everything last year for this team. And selfishly, like I want to have that moment where Donte gets called off the bench in like March of next season and the Target Center just explodes, because there is a world where it's not like he was the most athletic guy before the Achilles injury. There's a world where he's back before the end of the season, and that's just a boost going into the playoffs. But yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We can only hope. And, for Tim Connelly's appetite for big moves, I definitely agree. It does seem like he really values like the relationship side of things, whether it's like his long-term connection with Bones or even like little things like it seems like he is still rooting for Dylan Ham, and it feels like he was so obviously it benefited them to get Ayo and stuff, but it seems like he is intentional with like trading guys to good spots, especially like younger players, and I hope that continues in a different way with Donte, and he just values his presence because he's so important to the team, and he just seems like such an amazing guy. It would really stint to see him go, but yeah. Unless you have any other closing thoughts, I think we can wrap up the show here.
That's all I had.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate you hopping on. And before we officially close things out, I just want to give you a chance to plug your work, tell our listeners where they can find you at.
Oh God. A Duke MN on all social media, TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram, Twitter. Buzzer, new app that's coming out, being launched by some people. That's more of like I'm on it, and I've been told they're trying to do like a Bleacher Report team feed type of thing, but better than what Bleacher Report does. So sorry, Turner Broadcasting. Written work is all over at Zone Coverage. I do podcasts through Hitting the Hardwood Network, post-game shows for the Lynx and the Wolves, missing links for the Lynx, missing Wolves for the Wolves over on YouTube and my X. Also do some stuff with K-Fan and Fox 9, so if you ever see me on the airwaves there, always helps if you say, hey, I liked that guy. Gives me more of a chance to come back and do that stuff. But I appreciate you having me on, man. This is fun.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to do it again sometime. And yeah, if you guys aren't familiar with Andrew, make sure to go check out his work. He does a great job. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Peace out.